The order had already been sent, and the deadline was already counting down, and the message that carried both of those things was written in a language designed to leave no room for argument. Kneel by dawn. Those were the three words at the center of it, and around them the Aurelian sovereignty had wrapped a number so large it was meant to do the work of 1,000 threats. 340,000 warships. That was the count the sovereignty placed in front of Earth like a closed door. 340,000 hulls, gathered from 900 worlds, arranged in a sphere that already enclosed the orbit of the planet's farthest moon. The countdown stood at 19 hours when the message finished playing in the war rooms of Earth, and the people who heard it understood that the Empire had not come to negotiate. It had come to be obeyed. The sovereignty did not think of itself as cruel. It thought of itself as patient, and it thought of itself as correct, and above all, it thought of itself as large. For 11,000 years it had ruled by a single idea so simple it had never once failed. You count the hulls, whoever has more hulls wins, whoever has fewer kneels. The idea had conquered 900 worlds without ever needing to be clever, because cleverness was for the weak and numbers were for the strong. The sovereignty had numbers. It had always had numbers. And so when its long-range listening posts had first heard the small, stubborn signals of a planet called Earth refusing a polite request to join the Empire as a tribute world, the sovereignty had not been angry. It had simply done the arithmetic. The arithmetic said Earth had perhaps 2,000 warships. The arithmetic said the sovereignty could send a force 170 times that size. The arithmetic said the matter would be settled before the humans finished reading the message. To the sovereignty, the arithmetic was the same thing as the truth, and the truth had never owed it an apology, and so it had never learned to expect one. The being who carried the ultimatum was named Vor-Hesh-Talion, and he held the rank of Grand Tally, which meant he was the Empire's keeper of counts and its master of fleets. He was old by the measure of his kind, and he had spent his long life learning to trust the only thing that had never lied to him. He trusted the number. When he had been young, he had once watched a rival world try to fight the sovereignty with courage instead of hulls, and he had watched that courage burn for 6 days before the count crushed it flat. He had carried the lesson ever since. Courage was a quantity that could be measured, and it always measured smaller than 340,000. He had built his whole career on that lesson, promotion by promotion, world by world, until there was no one left above him, and no enemy left to surprise him, and the absence of surprise had become, to him, the very shape of wisdom. From the bridge of his command ship, the Eternal Reckoning, Vor-Hesh-Talion looked at the blue planet hanging in the dark and felt nothing that resembled doubt. The Reckoning was the largest ship the sovereignty had ever built, 11 kilometers from bow to stern, and around it, the rest of the Armada spread out in shells of light, hull beyond hull beyond hull, until the count became aglow. He had positioned them himself. Every ship had a place, and every place had a number, and the numbers added up to a total no enemy in 11,000 years had ever survived. He had stood on this bridge for 90 years, and in that time he had accepted the surrender of 41 worlds, and not one of those surrenders had cost him a single hour of worry, because not one of them had ever been in doubt. The count decided first. The fighting, when there was fighting, was only the count being read aloud. "They will kneel," Vor-Hesh-Talion said to his second, a younger officer named Sashka Vale. "They always kneel. The only thing a small power ever truly chooses is the hour. And if they do not?" Sashka Vale asked. She was not afraid. She only wanted to learn how the Old One thought, because she had been told her whole life that to think like the Grand Tally was to think correctly, and she had believed it, the way one believes in gravity. "Then we will demonstrate the number," said the Grand Tally, "and then they will kneel. There is no third path, Sashka. There has never been a third path. The number does not allow one. That is its mercy and its kindness, though the small powers rarely thank us for it. We spare them the long and pointless agony of hoping. We show them the count, and the hope dies cleanly, and what is left is a world that lives. You will see. By the second hour after dawn, this planet will be a tribute world, and in 100 years, it will be grateful, the way all of them are grateful, the way a being is grateful to the one who taught it the limits of its own strength." Sashka Vale inclined her head and said nothing more, because there was nothing more to say to a truth that large. She looked at the count on the great display, 340,000, and she felt the comfortable weight of it, the way a child feels the weight of a parent's hand, and she did not know, because she could not have known, that she was looking at the last hour of her life in which a number would ever comfort her again. Outside the wide ports, the Empire's lights turned slowly, a galaxy of obedience, and she let herself believe, for the last easy hour she would ever have, that obedience and strength were the same thing, because the Count had told her so, and the Count had never once been wrong in her hearing. On Earth, in a buried command center, under a mountain in a cold northern country, the demonstration was already being answered, though the sovereignty could not yet see it. The answer had a name. It was called the Last Tide, and it was the standing battle fleet that humanity had built across 40 years for exactly one purpose, which was to make sure the human species would never have to learn what kneeling felt like. The Last Tide had 91 ships. That was all. 91 against 340,000. To the sovereignty, if the sovereignty had known the number, it would have been a joke. The kind of joke an empire tells to remind itself how safe it is. To the people who built the Last Tide, the number had never been the point. They had not built 91 ships because 91 was all they could afford. They had built 91 because 91 was all they needed. And the difference between those two sentences was the difference between a people who had measured their enemy and a people who had measured themselves. At the head of the Last Tide was a dreadnought called the Cold Verdict, and at the head of the Cold Verdict was a man named Aldous Crane. He was 71 years old, and he had been at war, in one form or another, for 53 of those years. His hands shook now, slightly, when he was tired, and he was always tired. His doctors had told him, 4 months earlier, that his heart was failing in the slow and certain way that hearts do, and that he had perhaps a year, perhaps less, and that he should rest. He had thanked them, and he had not rested. He had gone back to the Cold Verdict, because the war he had spent his whole life preparing for had finally arrived, and a man does not retire from the only thing he was ever for. He had buried 2 wars' worth of friends. He had signed the letters that go home to families, 406 of them across his career, each one in his own hand, because he had decided long ago that a death deserved at least the cost of a man's own time. He knew the weight of the thing he was about to do, knew it better than anyone alive, and he carried it the way he carried everything, quietly, without complaint, with both hands. Aldous Crane had read the sovereignty's message 4 times. He had read the part about 340,000 hulls, and he had read the part about Dawn, and he had read the part where the Empire promised that resistance would be remembered as the largest mistake in human history. Then he had set the message down and looked at the officers in his ready room and said the only thing he had to say about it. "They counted our ships," he said. "They didn't count us." He did not raise his voice. He had stopped raising his voice decades ago, when he learned that the quietest man in a room is usually the one who has already decided. The officers around him were younger, all of them, and some of them were afraid, and Aldous Crane had no interest in pretending they should not be. Fear was reasonable. 340,000 was a reasonable thing to fear. He had no patience for the kind of leader who told frightened people they were not frightened. That was a lie. And a lie was a crack in a hull, and you did not go into the deepest water of your life with a cracked hull. "They believe the Count is the truth," he went on. "Their whole empire is built on that one belief. 11,000 years, and not one enemy has ever taught them otherwise. We're going to teach them." He let that sit. "Not because we hate them. Hating something that large is a waste of a heart. We're going to do it because they came to our home and told our children to kneel, and somebody has to answer that, and it turns out that somebody is us." He looked around the room, at each face in turn, and he gave them the only promise he was willing to make, which was the truest one. "I'm not going to tell you we'll all come home. I've never told a crew that, and I won't start tonight by lying to the best one I ever had. But I'll tell you this. When this is finished, no human child will ever again be told to kneel by anything that flies. That's the trade. That's what we're spending. Decide for yourselves whether it's worth it. I already have." There was a particular reason the Last Tide was ready, and it had to do with the kind of grief that does not soften, but instead hardens into a purpose. 8 years before, a sovereignty advance fleet on the Empire's far frontier had erased a human colony of 40,000 souls on a world called Meridian, not out of malice, but out of procedure, the way one clears land. The sovereignty had filed it under expansion, Earth had filed it under murder, and in the 8 years since, Earth had built 91 ships, and trained the crews who would fly them, and waited, with a cold and unhurried patience that mirrored the Empire's own, for the day the Empire would come to do it again on a larger scale. That day was now 19 hours away, and shrinking. The last tide had not been built to win an argument. It had been built to settle a debt. Aldous Crane had been at Meridian, after. He had walked the ash of it. He did not talk about it, and he did not keep a picture of it, and he did not let it make him loud. He let it make him certain. There is a difference, and the difference is the whole of what made him dangerous. A grief that makes a man loud is a grief that wants to be seen. A grief that makes a man certain is a grief that wants only to be answered, and it does not care who sees the answering, and it will wait 8 years, or 80, or forever, because it has stopped measuring time the way the living measure it. The sovereignty had spent its whole history fighting the loud kind of grief, the kind that burns for 6 days and then is gone. It had never once fought the certain kind. It did not know that the certain kind existed. It had never built the instrument that could detect it. The cold verdict slipped out of the dark behind Earth's smaller moon at the 18th hour, running silent, its engines cold and its hull painted in a black that drank light. Behind it, in a long staggered line, came the other 90 ships of the last tide, each one named for something that does not bend. The unyielding, the long memory, the salt and iron, the answer in kind, the hour of the wolf, the quiet reckoning. They did not light their drives. They did not broadcast. They moved the way a held breath moves, which is not at all, until it is released. The sovereignty's 340,000 hulls glowed in their perfect shells, certain of the count, certain of the dawn, and did not see the 91 shadows folding in toward them through the dark. 18 hours. The countdown went on. On the bridge of the eternal reckoning, Vor Heshtalion dimmed the lights, as was his custom in the final hours before a surrender, and watched the blue planet turn, and composed in his mind the gracious words he would speak when the kneeling came, because he prided himself on graciousness, on the gentleness of the strong, and he had a whole speech ready about the wisdom of the human leaders who would so wisely choose life. He rehearsed it twice. He liked the part where he forgave them. He had always liked the part where he forgave them. It was the Count's final kindness, that the conquered should be forgiven, and he was the hand that delivered it, and he had delivered it 41 times, and he expected to deliver it once more before the 2nd hour after dawn. He would not get to deliver it, but he did not know that yet. The Empire waited for a planet to kneel, and the planet, instead, had sent something to stand. 18 hours, and the held breath drew in, and the dark between the shells filled with shadows that the Count could not see, and the last easy night of the Aurelian sovereignty wore quietly down toward a dawn it had named itself, and would not survive. The deadline arrived the way all deadlines arrive, which is to say it simply came, without ceremony, and passed. Dawn broke over the eastern hemisphere of Earth, a thin gold line crawling across an ocean, and 340,000 sovereignty warships waited for the signal of surrender that the arithmetic had promised. The signal did not come. For the first 11 minutes, Vor Heshtalion was not concerned. Small powers were often slow. They argued among themselves. They drafted careful words. He had seen it many times. He gave the order to extend the deadline by 1 hour, as a courtesy, because the Empire could afford courtesy the way only the very large can, and he settled back into his chair and waited, and he was, in those 11 minutes, perhaps the most relaxed he had been in 90 years of command, because everything was going exactly as the Count had foretold, and a being is never so calm as in the last moment before he learns he was wrong. In the 12th minute, the Eternal Reckoning's outer sensors registered 91 objects where there had been nothing, and the courtesy ended. They had crossed the last distance during the night, the 91 ships of the last tide, threading the gaps between the Empire's outer shells with a precision that should not have been possible, and was anyway, and now they sat inside the Armada's formation, deep inside it, in the soft space between the great shells where the sovereignty had never imagined an enemy could be, because the sovereignty had never imagined an enemy small enough to slip through and brave enough to want to. The Count had a blind spot. The blind spot was the assumption that no one would ever bring fewer ships to a fight on purpose. Every defense the Empire had ever built, every formation, every doctrine, had been designed to stop a larger force, or an equal one, from breaking in from outside. It had no doctrine at all for 91 ships that wanted, more than anything in the universe, to be on the inside. "Identify them," Vorheshtalion said. 91 hulls, reported the officer at the tally station, and her voice did something sovereignty voices were not trained to do, which was to climb. 91. Human registry. They are inside the 7th shell, Grand Tally. They are inside us. Sashka Vale looked at the count and felt the first cold thread of something she had no word for, because her language, built by an empire that had never lost, had never needed a word for it. 91, she repeated. Against 340,000, they have brought 91 ships. Then it will be brief, said the Grand Tally, and he believed it, because the number told him to, and he had never in his life disbelieved the number. Fold the inner shells in. Crush them between the hulls. Let the humans see the count work. I want their planet watching when it happens. Open every channel to Earth. Let them all see what they chose. The order went out, and the inner shells began to move, hundreds upon hundreds of warships turning inward to close on 91. It was, Vorheshtalion thought, almost a waste. You did not need 100,000 ships to kill 91. But he wanted Earth to watch. He wanted the planet's people to see the count do what the count always did, so that when the surrender finally came, it would come complete, with nothing left in them that might one day rise again. He had learned, across 11,000 years of empire, that the most efficient mercy is total. A people half-conquered will bleed you for a generation. A people wholly broken will love you within one. He intended to break them wholly, and he intended their children to watch their defenders die, and he believed, with the full and gentle conviction of his kind, that he was doing them a kindness. Aboard the cold verdict, Aldous Crane watched the inner shells begin to turn, and felt the war change shape around him, and he was calm. "They're closing the trap," his tactical officer said. Her name was Priya Anand, and she was 34, and very good, and trying not to look at the number on the display, which had stopped being a number, and become a weather. Estimated 40,000 hulls converging. We're surrounded on every axis. They're folding the inner shells in to crush us. "No," Crane said. "We surrounded them. They just haven't worked it out yet." He stood, slowly, because standing quickly was a thing his body no longer offered him, and he put his hand on the back of his command chair the way another man might put a hand on a horse. "They've just done the one thing I needed them to do. They've packed themselves tighter. They've taken 340,000 ships, and squeeze them shoulder to shoulder so they can all watch us die at once. Signal the tide. We open on my mark. Full release. Everything we held back during the night. They spent 8 years counting their hulls, and they never once asked what we spent our 8 years building. What humanity had spent its 8 years building was not more ships. It had understood, very early, that it could never win the count, and so it had stopped trying to win the count, and started trying to make the count irrelevant. Each of the 91 ships of the last tide carried a weapon the sovereignty had no category for, because the sovereignty's entire science of war was the science of adding hulls together, and this was a science of taking a single hull and making it worth 10,000. They called the weapon the lance. It was a beam, of a kind, though calling it a beam was like calling the sea a puddle. Each lance, when fired, did not strike one ship. It struck a line, a perfectly straight line of unimaginable length, and everything that line touched ceased, in a single instant, to exist as anything other than light and dust. The Empire had built its formations in beautiful concentric shells, hull behind hull behind hull, every ship lined up neatly with the one ahead of it. They had built, without knowing it, the perfect targets for a weapon that punished things standing in lines. And then, on the morning of the deadline, they had pulled those lines tighter, on purpose, to crush 91 ships, and in doing so, they had loaded the gun that was about to be fired into them. "Mark," said Aldous Crane. 91 lances fired at once. There is no good way to describe, in simple words, what happened to the inner shells of the Aurelian sovereignty in the next 4 seconds, but the numbers do part of the work. Each lance, fired through the dense packed formation, passed through and ended an average of 310 ships, before its energy finally spent itself in the dark beyond. 91 lances, 310 ships each, in 4 seconds, 28,010 sovereignty warships stopped existing. Not damaged, not disabled. Gone. Converted in a single white instant into expanding shells of cooling debris, and the long silence that follows when many voices stop at once. On the bridge of the eternal reckoning, the tally station officer made a sound that was not a word. The great display that showed the Armada's count, the number that Vorheshtalion had trusted his whole life, the number that was the truth, dropped by 28,000 in the space of a breath, and then it kept dropping as the secondary detonations spread, ship into ship, the perfect tight formations, now feeding the fire that ate them. The grand tally stared at the display, and the display stared back, and for the first time in 90 years, the number on it was doing something the number was not supposed to be able to do. It was getting smaller while he watched. It was getting smaller faster than he could think. The count, Vorheshtalion said. He had not meant to say anything. The words simply came out, because the thing he was watching had no other place to go. The count is wrong. Recalculate. The sensors are damaged. The count is wrong. The count is not wrong, Grand Tally, said Sashka Vale, very quietly, and she was the first one aboard that ship to understand, and the understanding aged her by 100 years in 9 seconds. The count is exactly right. That is what is wrong. The sensors are perfect. They are telling us the truth. We have lost 28,000 ships, and we have not destroyed even one of theirs, and the count is right, and it cannot save us, and I do not think it ever could. He turned on her, and there was something in his face that she had never seen there, that no one in the Empire had ever seen on the face of a Grand Tally, and it took her a moment to name it, because it was so far outside everything she knew of him. It was the beginning of fear. Be silent, he said. The count has never failed. Press the attack. Tighten the formations. Bring the next shells in. Whatever weapon they have, it will exhaust itself. All weapons exhaust themselves. We have only to absorb it, and we have 300,000 hulls left to absorb it with. Aldous Crane did not celebrate. He watched the Empire's shells convulse, watched the gaps tear open in the glow, and his weathered face did not move, because he had been carrying the ash of Meridian for 8 years, and this was not joy. This was the debt beginning to be paid, and a debt is not a thing you cheer. He turned to Priya Anand. Reposition, he said. They'll try one of two things. They'll either scatter, or they'll pack in tighter to absorb the lances. Watch which. If they scatter, we hunt them as singles, and we hunt singles better than anything alive. If they pack in, we cut them in rows. There's no door out of this for them, Priya. Every choice they have left feeds us. That's what 8 years bought. Not a bigger fleet. A fleet they can't answer. Now make them understand it. One shell at a time. The sovereignty chose, at first, to pack in tighter, because Vorheshtalion ordered it, and Vorheshtalion still believed that the weapon would exhaust itself, and that the only thing to do with a storm was to put more wall in front of it. So the next shells came in, dense and obedient and beautiful, and the lances found them, and the count fell again, 60,000 now, then 80, and still no human ship had so much as scorched its paint, and somewhere in the second quarter of the first hour, a thing began to move through the sovereignty's command that had never moved through it before, faster than any order, faster than light it sometimes seemed, and the thing was doubt. Vorheshtalion felt it reach his own bridge. He felt his officers begin to look at him the way the conquered had always looked at him, and he understood, dimly, that something had reversed, that he was standing now where 41 worlds had stood, and he did not have the words for it because he had never needed them, and the not having was its own particular terror. He reached for the only thing he had ever had. More hulls, he said. Bring up the 5th and 6th shells. We outnumber them 3,000 to 1. The number wins. The number always wins. Say it back to me. The number always wins. The number always wins, his officers said, because they had been raised to say it, and they did not yet know that they were saying it over the open grave of the thing it described. It was the Empire's oldest prayer, said before every battle for 11,000 years, and Sashka Vale, mouthing it with the others out of 9,000 years of habit, heard for the first time how a prayer sounds when the God it is addressed to has already stopped listening. It sounded like men shouting a number into a wind that did not care what the number was. The realization moved through the Aurelian sovereignty the way cold moves through water. from the deep place upward, and it reached different beings at different hours, and each of them broke in a different way. The sub-commanders of the outer shells were the last to understand, because they were the farthest from the dying, and they kept sending their squadrons forward in good order, neat and dense and obedient, into lines they could not see and could not have imagined. And they died in good order, neat and dense and obedient, 100 at a time, and then 1,000 at a time. The mid-shell commanders understood sooner, because they could see the gaps, the long straight tunnels of nothing carved through the formation where a lance had passed, and a tunnel of nothing where there should be ships is a thing that teaches very quickly. There was one sub-commander, a young officer named HFY, commanding a squadron in the 4th shell, who understood faster than any of them, and what he did with the understanding would be remembered, by the few who survived to remember it, as the first true measure of what the day was. He saw a lance pass through his squadron, saw 11 of his sister ships become light in the space between one breath and the next, and he did not send his remaining ships forward into the line. He pulled them out. He broke formation, the gravest crime in the sovereignty's code, and he scattered his survivors into the dark, and he opened a channel to his shell commander, and said the thing that no sovereignty officer had said in 11,000 years. "Sir," said HFY, "the formation is the death. The formation is what they are killing. As long as we hold the line, we are simply rows of targets waiting our turn. I have broken mine. I am alive. The others holding their lines are dead and do not yet know it. For the sake of the Empire, sir, give the order to scatter." The shell commander, an old and decorated being named Sol, who had held formation in 40 battles and had never once been wronged to, looked at the young officer's defiance and felt his whole life rise up against it. "You will return to your position," Sol said. "You will hold the line. Breaking formation is death. It has always been death. The line is the Empire. The line is what we are." "With respect, sir," said HFY, "today the line is what we were." And HFY, who would not return to the line, lived, and Sol, who held it, was light within the minute. That was the lesson, and it spread, ship to ship, in defiance of every order from above, and slowly, raggedly, against 11,000 years of training, the Aurelian sovereignty began to come apart. Not under the lances alone, but under the dawning and unbearable knowledge that everything it had ever believed about war was a target painted across the dark. The count fell past 200,000, and as it fell, the discipline that had held the Empire together for 11,000 years began to fail in a way the Empire had no procedure for, because every procedure it had was a procedure for victory. There was no manual for a sovereignty fleet that was losing, because no sovereignty fleet had ever lost, and so each commander, reaching for the page that would tell him what to do, found only blank paper, and on the blank paper, each one wrote his own panic in his own hand. Some charged, some fled. Some sat still and broadcast for orders to a chain of command that was itself broadcasting upward for orders. The whole vast structure of the Empire suddenly revealed as a tower of beings, all waiting for the being above them to know what to do. And at the very top of the tower stood Vor Heshtalion, and he did not know what to do. And for the first time in his life, the not knowing reached all the way down through 340,000 ships to the youngest gunner in the outermost shell, and the tower, feeling its top go hollow, began very quietly to fall. But it was Vor Heshtalion, at the very heart of the Armada, on the bridge of the eternal reckoning, who understood last and most completely, because he had the most to lose, and that loss was not ships. It was the truth he had lived by. It was the only God he had ever served, and it was dying in front of him in real time, 3,000 hulls a minute, and there was nothing he could add to it to make it live. He watched the gaps open. He watched the shells he had positioned with his own hand come apart. He watched HFY's heresy spread, watched his own captains begin to disobey him, to scatter, to flee, and he understood that he was losing not only the battle, but the obedience that had made the battle possible, and that the two were the same thing, and had always been the same thing, and that he had never seen it, because no one had ever taken it from him before. "Open a channel to the human flagship," he said, in the second hour, when the count had fallen below 140,000. His voice had changed, the certainty had gone out of it, and what was left was older, and smaller, and almost, though he would not have used the word, afraid. The channel opened. On the screen of the Eternal Reckoning appeared the face of Aldous Crane, 71 years old, lined and gray and entirely without triumph. And Vorhesh Talion looked at that face and understood that he was speaking to the thing that had unmade him, and that the thing was tired and old and was not enjoying this, and that this was somehow worse than if it had been. He had imagined, in the rare moments he had imagined defeat at all, that it would wear a snarling face. He had not imagined it would look like a weary old man who had simply come to collect what he was owed. "Human," said the Grand Tally. "I am Vorhesh Talion, Grand Tally of the Aurelian Sovereignty. I command this armada. I wish to understand." "Understand what?" said Crane. It was not a question. He had no questions for this being. He had only an answer. 8 years old. "How," said Vorhesh Talion, "how does 91 defeat 340,000? It is not possible. It violates the count. I have served the count for 9,000 of your years, and it has never lied. Tell me how it is lying now." And Aldous Crane, who could have said nothing, who could have closed the channel and let the being drown in not knowing, chose instead to answer, because he wanted this one, this keeper of counts, to carry the answer back into whatever followed. He wanted the Empire to have the words. "It isn't lying," Crane said. "The count is exactly right. You have 131,000 ships left, and we have 91, and your count is perfect. The count was never the problem. The problem is that you thought the count was the war." He leaned forward, slightly, and the screen caught the gray in his face and the steadiness in his eyes. "A number can tell you how many ships there are. It can't tell you what's inside them. You counted our hulls and you thought you'd counted us. But a hull is just a box. What matters is what a people will pour into the box, and how much they'll pour, and what they're willing to lose, and whether they've buried 40,000 of their own on a world called Meridian and decided that there is no number large enough to make them kneel. You can't count that. You never built the instrument, so you measured the only thing your instrument could read, and you called it the truth, and you brought it to our home. Meridian," said Vorhesh Talion slowly, "the frontier world, the clearance. That was 8 years ago. That was a procedure, a small thing, a formality of expansion. We did not even record the name." "We did," said Crane. "It was 40,000 people. We recorded every one of the names. We've been reading them aloud, one a day, for 8 years, on every ship in this fleet. We finished the list 2 months ago and started again. The crew of the Cold Verdict can recite 1,000 of them from memory. You didn't even keep the name of the world. That's the whole difference between us, Grand Tally, in one sentence. You forgot a thing we will never, ever stop remembering." For a long moment, the Grand Tally said nothing, and on his bridge, Sashka Vale watched her commander's certainty finish dying, and she found that she did not pity him, and she found that she did not hate the human either, and what she felt instead was the strange, clean grief of someone watching an old wrong come back, wearing the face of the people it was done to. 11,000 years of clearing land, 11,000 years of procedures, and the Empire had never once imagined that one of the cleared worlds might survive, and remember, and build, and come. "We outnumber you still by more than 1,000 to 1, Vorhesh Talion said, and it was not a threat now, it was almost a plea, the last reach of a drowning being for the surface he could still see and could no longer touch. 1,000 to 1. There must be a number that holds. There has always been a number that holds." "Yes," said Aldous Crane, "and in 2 hours, that'll be 500 to 1, and in 4 hours, it'll be 100 to 1. And the curve doesn't bend, Grand Tally, it only goes one way. You can watch it happen, or you can take what's left of your empire and run, but I'd be lying if I told you running saves you. We have very long memories, and we have nowhere else to be, and we have 91 ships that never run out. You came to teach our children what kneeling feels like. Before this is over, I'm going to teach your empire." He paused, and for just a moment, something that was almost mercy crossed his old face, and then it was gone, because mercy was not what he had come for. "I'll give you one thing, because I'm not the man you are. Lay down every gun, go drives cold, stop running, and I'll let your people live. That offer stands the whole battle. But the second a sovereignty gun fires at one of mine, the offer is off for the ship that fired it. The choice is yours. Ship by ship, gun by gun. That's more choices than you gave Meridian. He closed the channel. The human admiral's words went out across the open band, because the Grand Tally had ordered every channel open to Earth, and so they reached not only the eternal reckoning, but every ship in the dying Armada, and the offer reached them too, and the choice, ship by ship, gun by gun, and so, the realization that had been spreading as terror became something more dangerous to the Empire than terror. It became a decision. Some ships laid down their guns, some ran. Some, the proud ones, the old ones, the ones who could not imagine a universe in which the count had failed, kept firing, and chose, gun by gun, the only ending the human had left them. And the last tide moved through them all, patient and cold and exact, and gave each ship precisely the ending it chose, and the count fell, and the glow of the Empire dimmed shell by shell toward the dark. What followed, across the third and fourth hours, was the part that the survivors of the Aurelian sovereignty would later be unable to describe without their voices failing, and so they mostly did not describe it, and the Empire's histories left a blank space where it should have been, a blank space shaped exactly like the truth. The last tide moved through the dying Armada with a patience that was somehow the most terrible thing about it. It did not rush, it did not gloat. It carved its lines, and repositioned, and carved again, and the count fell, and the great glowing shells that had enclosed a moon came apart shell by shell, and the dark between the human ships filled with the cooling dust of an empire that had never once, in 11,000 years, been made to feel small. There was a moment, near the start of the third hour, when the sovereignty believed for the space of a few minutes that it had found the answer at last. A midshell commander named HFY, no relation to the Grand Tally but raised in the same school of the Count, gathered 11,000 ships out of the chaos, and formed them not into a shell, but into a wedge, a dense armored spear aimed straight at the cold verdict, reasoning that if the human weapon cut lines, then a force thick enough, deep enough, driven hard enough, might reach the flagship before the lance could cut all the way through it. It was the best idea any sovereignty officer had that day. It was a good idea. HFY drove his 11,000 ships forward in a solid mass, layer behind layer, sacrificing the front ranks willingly so the rear ranks might close the distance, and for 90 seconds it looked, on the displays of both fleets, as though the Empire had finally found a shape the lance could not undo. Aldous Crane watched the wedge form and recognized it for what it was, the first competent thing the enemy had done, and he respected it, the way one craftsman respects another, and then he unmade it. "They've stacked 11,000 hulls into a single column to reach us," he said. "Good, that's the most ships they've ever put on one line. Concentrate fire, every lance in the fleet, the same axis, the same instant. We're not going to cut the wedge. We're going to pour the whole fleet's fire down its throat at once. On my mark." And 91 lances, which had until that moment each carved its own separate line through the Empire, fired as one, down the single axis of the wedge, 91 beams converging into one unimaginable lance of light, and HFY's 11,000 ships, stacked deep and dense and brave, became the longest tunnel of nothing the battle would carve. The whole wedge unmade root and branch in under 2 seconds, front rank and rear rank, and the commander in the heart of it, gone. And where the spear had been, there was only the straight dark line of its own ambition, pointing back at the Empire like an accusation. After that, the sovereignty stopped having ideas. After that, it only had the dying, and the choosing, gun by gun, and the offer that still stood, and the slow, cold curve that bent only one way. There was, somewhere in the middle of the third hour, a single transmission that the human fleet recorded and later carried home, and it became, in the years that followed, the thing the people of Earth pointed to when they wanted to explain what the battle had truly been. It came from a sovereignty frigate captain named Dal Asher Ven, a young officer in the 6th Shell who had been in command for less than a year and who had, in that hour, watched her entire squadron unmade around her while she sat at the center of it, untouched by chance, the last living thing in a sphere of cooling dust. She did not broadcast a surrender. She did not broadcast a curse. She broadcast a question, in the clear, to no one in particular, in a voice that was very calm and very young. "If the Count was never the strength," she said, "then what was? What were we? All of us. All this time. What was the Empire? if it was never the number. And then her transmission ended, not because her ship was struck, but because she had said the only thing left in her to say, and there was no one in 11,000 years of empire who had ever been taught the answer. And so the answer did not come, and Dal Asher Ven flew on into the dark with her question unanswered. And it was, in its way, the truest epitaph the Aurelian sovereignty ever received, because it was the first honest thing any of them had ever asked. Aldous Crane heard that transmission. He had it relayed to his own chair, and he listened to it once, and he did not answer it either, though he could have, because he understood that some questions are not asked to be answered, but only to be finally, at long last, asked. But he turned to Priya Anand afterward, and he said the thing that he would have said to the young captain if there had been any kindness in saying it, which there was not, and so he said it only to his own crew, as a lesson, the way he said everything. "That's the one to remember," he said. "Not the grand tally. Her, she figured it out at the end. The real thing, the thing none of them were ever told. The empire was never the number. It was the willingness to spend other people and keep yourself. That's all it ever was. 11,000 years of one rule, and the rule was that someone else always paid. We're going to teach them a different rule before this day is done, and they're going to hate it. And one day, a long way from now, the ones who live are going to thank us for it, the way you thank the person who broke the thing that was breaking you." Now it felt small. That was the thing the sovereignty learned in those hours, the thing it had spent its whole existence inflicting on others and had never received in return. It learned the particular cold of being the lesser number. It learned what 900 conquered worlds had felt, looking up at the Count and understanding that the Count had already decided everything. The empire that ruled by making others feel small was being taught, by 91 ships, exactly how small felt from the inside, and there was no instrument in all its science that had ever prepared it for the lesson. There was a cost on the human side too, though it never touched a single hull, and Aldous Crane felt every ounce of it. He did not pretend the killing was clean. He stood at the center of his bridge and watched 100,000 thinking beings end, hour by hour, and he knew that many of them had never chosen Meridian, had never even heard its name, until 2 hours ago, when he himself had spoken it across the open band. He knew that some of the ships still firing were crewed by the young and the frightened and the obedient, beings who had been raised on the Count the way he had been raised on duty, who were dying for a god they had not chosen any more than he had chosen his failing heart. He did not let it stop him, but he did not let himself look away from it either, because the day a commander lets himself look away from the cost is the day the cost stops being paid by him and starts being paid by his soul. And Aldous Crane intended to pay it himself, all of it, to the last coin. "Admiral," said Priya Anand, in the 4th hour, "the Salt and Iron is taking heavy fire. They've concentrated on her, 3,000 ships, all the proud ones, the ones who won't lay down. Her shields are down to 40%. Tell her captain to angle into the line and keep firing," Crane said. "If they want to spend 3,000 hulls trying to kill one of ours, let them. That's a trade we win every single time." He paused, and something almost like gentleness crossed his face. "And tell her crew I see them. Tell them the whole tide sees them. No one out here is alone. That's the other thing the Empire never counted. They have 100,000 ships left and not one of them would die for the ship beside it. We have 91, and there isn't one of us who wouldn't. Send the long memory and the answer in kind wide. Cut the ships flanking the Salt and Iron. Bring her home whole." The Salt and Iron held. Her shields fell to 30%, then climbed back to 50, as the ships beside her swung wide and cut the lines that were closing on her. And the 3,000 hulls the Sovereignty had committed to killing one human ship became, in 90 seconds, 3,000 hulls that no longer existed, and the Salt and Iron fired on, untouched in the place that mattered, which was the place where a crew decides whether it is beaten. It was not beaten. None of them were beaten. That was the revelation spreading now, through what was left of the Sovereignty's command, ship to ship, faster than any order. The small black fleet was not winning slowly. It was not winning at cost. It was simply winning, the way the tide wins against a sandcastle, without effort and without end, and without the slightest possibility of being asked to stop. There was a thing the Sovereignty's surviving officers kept doing, in those hours, that Aldous Crane recognized and pitied, which was that they kept treating the Count as though it were a wall they could hide behind, when it had become a roof that was falling on them. A captain named Velu Marshanter, commanding a heavy cruiser in the 5th Shell, gathered 900 ships around her own, and ordered them to form a sphere with her ship at the center, reasoning that if she surrounded herself with enough hulls, the human weapon would have to chew through all of them before it reached her. She had it exactly backward. The 900 ships she gathered did not protect her. They marked her. They turned her single cruiser into the densest target on that part of the field, and a single lance, finding the line that ran through the heart of her careful sphere, ended all 900, and the cruiser at the center, in one pass. And Velu Marshanter died still believing, in her last half-second, that more hulls were safer than fewer, because it was the only thing she had ever been taught, and there had been no time to teach her otherwise. That was the Empire's tragedy in miniature. It did not lose because its people were cowards. Many of them were brave. It lost because every brave thing they knew how to do was a thing that made the count tighter, and the count was the trap, and so their courage fed the very weapon that was killing them, and they could not stop, because to stop being the count was to stop being the sovereignty, and a being cannot, in an afternoon, agree to stop being what it is. By the end of the 4th hour, the count stood at 90,000. The sovereignty had lost 250,000 warships in 4 hours, and the last tide had lost none. Aldous Crane looked at that and knew the battle was already decided, and knew also that the Empire's mind was made of the number, and the number was still very large, and that a being made of a number cannot stop until the number is small enough to fit inside the thing it has become instead. He intended to teach them the rest of the way. And somewhere in the heart of the Armada, on the bridge of the Eternal Reckoning, Vor Heshtalion, Grand Tally of a dying empire, was learning the last and worst lesson of his 9,000 years, which was that there had always been a number he could not see, a single old man at the center of a single black ship, and that the one he could not see was worth more than all the ones he could. The catastrophic turn, when the full scale of it came not in a single stroke, but in the steady, unbearable arithmetic of the 5th hour, and it was the alien commander, more than anyone, who was made to read it. Vor Heshtalion had stopped giving orders. There was no point. His captains no longer obeyed the ones he gave, and the ones he might have given would not have changed the curve, and he knew it now, knew it in the deep place where the Count had lived, which was empty. He stood on the bridge of the Eternal Reckoning and watched his empire end in numbers, and because numbers were the only language he had ever truly known, he made himself read them, all of them, as a kind of penance he did not have the word for. 90,000, falling, 80. He watched a shell of 15,000 ships, the proud Tellurian Guard, the oldest formation in the Empire, the one that had taken the capital world of the sovereignty's last great rival, 900 years before, hold its line out of pure ancestral pride, and be cut from existence in under 4 minutes. 15,000 years of history gone, in less time than it took him to register that they were gone. 70,000. He watched the supply tenders, the unarmed ones, lay down what they did not have, and go drives cold, and he watched the human ships pass them by, untouched, exactly as the offer had promised, and the mercy of it was somehow harder to bear than the killing, because it meant the killing had never been the point, that the humans had always been able to choose, that every sovereignty ship that died had died because it had chosen the count over the offer, had chosen the number over its own life, right to the end. 60,000, 50. Grand tally. It was Sashka Vale. She had not left his side. She could have. Many had taken the offer and lived. She had stayed, because she had decided, somewhere in the 3rd hour, that whatever the count had been, she would not let the being who had taught it to her face, its unmaking alone. Grand tally. Half the Empire's standing fleet is gone, half of everything. In an afternoon, there were captains in that count who held worlds. There were ships in that count, older than our oldest cities. They are dust now, and the human fleet has not lost one hull, and the curve has not changed, and it will not change. I have run it 40 times. It ends the same every time. It ends with all of us gone, and all of them home. I know, said Vor Heshtalion. Then I must ask you, she said, what we did at Meridian. You said it was a procedure, a small thing. We did not keep the name. Grand Tally, I have served you for 30 years, and I have never asked you anything that was not about the count. I am asking you now, how many worlds are like Meridian? How many small things? How many names we did not keep? He was quiet for a long time. The count fell. 45,000. And when he answered, his voice was the voice of a being who has finally, at the very end, set down the only thing he ever carried, and found that his hands had been broken under it for 9,000 years, without his ever noticing. 410, he said. 410 clearances, in my time as grand tally. 40,000 here, 80,000 there. We did not keep the names. There were too many to keep, and they did not matter, because the count did not have a column for them. I filed them under expansion. I have spent my whole life believing that the number was the truth, and that anything the number could not hold was not real, and I taught you to believe it, and I was wrong, Sashka. I was wrong for 9,000 years, and the thing that finally proved it to me is one old man in a black ship who remembered a name I threw away. The humans built an instrument we never built. They built it out of grief, and they pointed it at us, and it reads true. We were never the larger power. We only had the larger number. We never once counted what was on the other side, because we did not believe there was anything to count. And do you know the worst of it, Sashka? If even one of those 410 worlds had built what this one built, we would have learned this lesson 9,000 years and 409 worlds ago. We were not strong. We were only lucky. We spent 11,000 years mistaking our luck for a law, and the law has come due all at once, in a single afternoon, with the interest of every name we never kept. Sashka Vale did not answer him at once. There was no answer that did not begin with the word that her language had never owned. The word for what you feel when the thing you built your life on is revealed, in an afternoon, to have been a wall holding back nothing, because there had never been anything behind it but more of itself. She had served the count for 30 years. She had read it aloud before every battle. She had believed, as completely as one believes in the floor beneath one's feet, that the count was the bedrock of the universe, that a larger number was a deeper truth, and that the Empire stood on the deepest truth of all. And now she stood on a bridge that was a hollow shell, sliding toward its end, and she looked at the count falling and falling on the great display, and she understood that the floor had never been there, that she had spent her whole life standing on a number, and that a number, it turned out, was a thing you could stand on only as long as no one ever pushed. I have one regret, Grand Tally, she said at last, and her voice was steady, which surprised her. Not that we lose. We were always going to lose, I think. The first time we cleared a world and did not keep its name. We only delayed it 9,000 years. My regret is that we will not live to see what the worlds become without us. The 900. The ones we held down with the count. I find I want to know what they would build, if we were not standing on them. I think it might be something we never imagined, because we were never able to imagine anything that did not begin with a number. I would have liked to see it. That is my regret. That I taught the children of 900 worlds to be afraid of a number, and I will not live to watch them stop. You taught them what I taught you, said Vorheshtalion. The fault is mine. All of it. Back to the first cleared world. If there is an account, Sashka, it is in my name, and I will pay it in 4 seconds when the human ship reaches us. And I find, to my own surprise, that I am glad to pay it, because the only thing worse than dying for a god that was false would be living on, knowing it was false, and having nothing left to put in its place. He looked at her, and for the only time in 30 years, there was something almost gentle in the old being's face. You were the best of us. You were the one who looked. Remember that you looked, at the end. That is more than the Empire ever did. 40,000. The same number, Sashka Vale noticed with a chill she would carry to her grave, as the dead of Meridian. The Empire had been reduced, in 5 hours, to the exact size of the world it had cleared and not bothered to name, and somewhere in that symmetry was the whole shape of justice, cold and round and complete. It was then, in the depth of the 5th hour, with the Empire reduced to 40,000 hulls and falling, that Vorheshtalion reached for one final number, and in reaching for it, became, at the very last, both the worst and the truest version of himself. He had held the eternal reckoning in reserve through the whole of the battle, 11 kilometers of the Empire's greatest engineering, and within it slept the one weapon the sovereignty had built that did not rely on the count, a weapon it had made in secret and never used because it had never needed to, because the count had always been enough. It was called the collapse, and it was a single shot, a sphere of folded space that, when released, would unmake everything within a radius of 40,000 kilometers, friend and foe alike, the Empire's own dying ships included. It was a weapon for a being who would rather erase the board than lose the game. Vorheshtalion had sworn, in his youth, that he would never use it, because to use it was to admit the count had failed. In the 5th hour, with his god dead and his empire halved, and the human fleet untouched, he admitted it. "Charge the collapse," he said. Sashka Vale turned to him, and her face had the openness of someone who has already given up everything except the last thing. "Grand tally. The collapse will take our own surrendered ships, 30,000 of them, cold and helpless, drives dead, weapons laid down, beings who took the humans' offer and chose to live. We would be clearing them, the way we cleared Meridian. The same procedure, the same forgetting. We would be doing, in our last hour, the exact thing that brought the human fleet to our door, and we would be doing it to our own." "I know what it does," said Vorheshtalion. "Then you know it does not change the outcome," she said. And she was not pleading, she was simply telling him the truth one last time, the way he had told it to 41 worlds. The curve does not bend. The collapse takes the human flagship, perhaps, if it comes close enough. It takes 40,000 kilometers of the dead and the surrendered with it. And then there are still 90 human ships, or 89, and they are still untouched, and we are still gone. The only thing you change by firing it is the answer to one question, and it is the only question you have left. What kind of empire dies today? The one that, at the very end, learned the lesson, or the one that, at the very end, proved it deserved every minute of this? He looked at her for a long time, and the terrible thing, the thing she would carry forever, was that she watched him choose, and she watched him choose wrong, and she understood why, and the understanding did not make it bearable. 11,000 years had built him too well, a being made entirely of the count, told at the very end that the count is nothing, does not become something else. He breaks, and reaches for the one move that lets him pretend, for one more minute, that he still has a number left to throw. "Fire the collapse," he said, "the moment the human flagship is in range. If we cannot win by the count, then there will be no board left to count at all. Let them take their victory home, through a hole in space where 40,000 kilometers used to be. Let that be the last thing the count ever does. Subtract." Sashka Vale did not move to obey, but the order did not need her. The eternal reckoning had a crew of the proud ones, the old ones, the ones who had stayed at the heart of the dying, because the count was all they were. And they began to charge the collapse, and at the center of the Armada, a deep wrong gathering of energy began, a thing unlike anything else on the field, the Empire's last and worst number waking up. The last tide had seen the eternal reckoning begin to wake. The energy signature of the collapse charging was unlike anything else on the field, and Priya Anand's board lit with it, and she called it out, and Aldous Crane understood at once what it was, because he had spent 40 years learning to recognize the shape of a being who would rather end everything than lose. "That's a doomsday charge," Crane said. "Single use. Massive radius. Read me the numbers, Priya. All of them. I need the real arithmetic now, not the comfortable kind." Priya Anand read them, and her voice was steady because she had decided it would be, though her hands were not. "Radius of the collapse, 40,000 kilometers. Hard edge, total unmaking inside it. No shields stop it. The reckoning is at the center of their formation, 62,000 kilometers from us, and pulling back, trying to open enough gap that it doesn't catch itself when it fires. Time to full charge, 11 minutes. Once it's charged, they can hold it, they can wait, they can sit on it for 12 hours, and fire it the instant any one of our ships drifts inside 40,000 kilometers. We can't ignore it, we can't outwait it, and we can't stop it from out here, because nothing we have reaches the core through that armor at this range." "And if we close," said Crane, "if we close to under 40,000, we're inside the kill zone the moment it fires," she said. "If we put a lance straight through the Reckoning's core while the charge is building, the lance detonates the charge prematurely, inside their own hull, folded in on itself, contained. The radius collapses to almost nothing. It takes the Reckoning, and nothing else. It ends the threat completely." She made herself finish it. But to put a lance through the core cleanly, Through 11 kilometers of the heaviest armor the Empire ever built, the firing ship has to be at point-blank range. Inside 15,000 kilometers, deep inside the kill zone, and the timing has to be perfect, because if the charge reaches full and fires at full radius, even a half-second before the lance reaches the core, the firing ship is gone, and 40,000 kilometers with it. There's no margin. Whoever takes that shot is close enough that they don't come back. It can't be done from a distance, and it can't be done safely. It can only be done by someone who decides, going in, that they're not coming out. There it was. The arithmetic, finished. The bridge of the cold verdict was silent. But the crew understood the trap, every one of them. They had won the battle 100 times over. The curve bent only one way. 91 ships had brought down 250,000 and were about to bring down the rest. And the Empire had reached, at the very end, for the one move that could still take something from them. And it could not be unmade from a distance. And it could not be left to wait. Because a charged collapse in the hands of a being with nothing left to lose is a threat that does not expire, and does not forgive, and does not need to be aimed, only triggered. The moment anyone makes a mistake across the next 12 hours. Aldous Crane stood at the center of his bridge, 71 years old, his failing heart laboring quietly in his chest the way it had labored for 4 months. And he did the arithmetic, the real arithmetic, the kind the sovereignty had never learned, the kind that puts a single life on one side of the equation and a whole fleet on the other, and is not afraid of the answer. He had been doing this arithmetic his whole life. He had done it 406 times, once for every letter he had signed and sent home. He had only never, until now, had the privilege of putting himself on the small side of it. The cold verdict makes the run, he said. One ship, point blank. We put a lance through the reckoning's core, and we fold their doomsday back into the hull that built it. He turned, and he was already giving the orders that would keep his decision from being argued. Transfer my flag to the unyielding. Priya, you, and the entire bridge crew take the shuttle the moment the firing solution is locked. The verdict makes the run alone. I'll be the only one aboard. That's not a discussion. That's the last order I'll ever give, and I'd like it obeyed. Admiral, Priya Anand began, and her voice, which had held steady through 250,000 deaths, finally cracked. There's no one who can fly her, and fire her, and time it alone. It takes a bridge. It takes a crew. You can't. She'll fly herself for 90 seconds on a locked course, and the lance fires from one console. And I've fired a lance from one console before, and the timing is one man's job if that man is willing to ride it all the way in, Crane said. It's not a crew's job, Priya. A crew has families. A crew has years. This is an old man's job. This is precisely and exactly an old man's job. And I have been an old man waiting for precisely and exactly this job for longer than I let myself know. He almost smiled. I've got a failing heart and a year at the outside. The doctors told me to rest 4 months ago. Instead, I got to come here and watch 91 ships answer Meridian. And now I get to put the last nail in it myself. And I get to do it, knowing every one of you flies home. 91 ships came. 91 ships leave. That's the number I keep. That's the only number that was ever mine. Don't take it from me, by dying in my place. Get to the shuttle. Take our people home. Tell Earth the debt is paid, all of it, to the last coin. For a moment no one moved, and then they did, because they were his crew, and they had learned from him that the deepest respect you can pay a man is to let him spend himself the way he has chosen. They transferred the flag to the unyielding. They locked the firing solution. They went, one by one, to the shuttle, and each of them stopped, going past him, and he had a word for each of them, by name, because he knew all their names, all 240 of them, the way he had known the 406 and the 40,000 of Meridian, because knowing the names was the instrument, was the whole of it, was the thing the Empire had never built. Priya Anand was the last. She stopped at the hatch and looked back at the old man alone at the center of his black dreadnought, and she could not find the words, and so he gave them to her, the way he had given everyone everything his whole life. 91, go home, Commander, he said. 91, go home, Admiral, she answered, and her voice held this time, because she had decided it would, for him, as a last gift. And she went, and the shuttle fell away into the dark toward the unyielding, and the cold verdict was alone. The black dreadnought turned its bow toward the eternal reckoning and lit its drives for the first time in the whole long battle, and it ran. It ran straight down the throat of the dying Armada, through the gaps the lances had carved, past the cold surrendered hulls and the burning ones, past the 30,000 ships that had laid down their guns and now watched, helpless and uncomprehending, as a single black ship hurled itself toward the heart of everything. 11 kilometers of the Empire's greatest engineering grew in the cold verdict's sights, and aboard the eternal reckoning, Vor-Heshtalion saw it come, and could not understand it. "It is one ship," he said. "Only one. Where is the rest of the fleet? Why does it come alone? Why is it inside the radius?" He turned to Sashka Vale, and there was in his face the same bewilderment that had been there in the 12th minute, when the count first began to fall, the bewilderment of a being watching the universe do a thing his instrument said was impossible. "It will die. If we fire the collapse, it dies, and the rest of their fleet is too far to matter, and we take only one ship and 40,000 kilometers of our own dead. One ship. Why would they spend nothing to stop us, and then throw away one ship for no gain? The arithmetic is senseless." And Sashka Vale, watching the small black dreadnought run alone into the kill zone of the doomsday weapon, understood before her commander did, because she had spent the whole day learning the thing the Empire had never known, which was how to read the inside of a hull, and not just the count of it. And when she understood, she wept, which was a thing her kind did rarely, and which the Grand Tally had never once seen her do. "It is not one ship, Grand Tally," she said. "Look closer. Their fleet did not come, because their fleet does not need to come. One ship can end the collapse, if it gets close enough to put a lance through our core before we fire. One ship can do it." And so they sent one ship, and they sent it with one being aboard, because they will not spend two lives where one will do, and they will not order any one of their own to die when one of them is willing to choose it. That is the human flagship, Grand Tally. That is their admiral, the old one, the one who remembered Meridian. He is alone aboard that ship. He sent his crew away, every one of them, so that not one of them dies, and he is writing it into us himself, because the cost has come due, and he has decided to be the one who pays it. That is what we never counted. That is what was inside the box. We counted 340,000 hulls and called it strength, and the truth of their strength is a single old man who will trade his one life so that 91 of his ships go home whole. We never built the instrument that could see him. We never even knew he was a quantity at all. Vor-Heshtalion looked at the small black ship running alone toward him, paying in a coin the Empire had never possessed, asking nothing, sparing everyone it could, and in the last clear moment of his long life, he finally understood the answer to the question he had asked across the channel, and the understanding was the most complete defeat of all, because it was not a defeat of his fleet. It was a defeat of his God. There had been a number on the other side, all along, that he could not see, and could not subtract, and could not outnumber, and the number was one, and one had been enough, and one had always been enough, and he had spent 9,000 years too certain to look for it. He thought, in that last moment, of the gracious speech he had rehearsed the night before, the one about forgiving the wise, and he understood that the speech had always been a lie, that he had never forgiven anyone, that forgiveness was a thing you offered to an equal, and he had never once in 11,000 years met anyone he believed to be his equal, until now, until this old dying man, who was about to forgive him, by sparing his 30,000 surrendered ships, at the cost of his own single life, and the shame of it was the last thing the Count ever taught him. "Fire the collapse," he said, but the order had no certainty left in it, only the dead reflex of a being doing the last thing his nature allowed. Fire it now, before they... He was too late by 4 seconds. The cold verdict closed to 12,000 kilometers, deep inside the kill zone, point blank against 11 kilometers of armor, and Aldous Crane, alone at the center of his ship, his failing heart steady now, steadier than it had been in 4 months, put his old hand on the firing control. He did not think of the Empire. He did not think of the Count. He did not even think, in that last instant, of Meridian, though Meridian had brought him here, and Meridian was the reason for all of it. He thought of the simple fact that 91 ships were going home, all of them, every one, 240 crew aboard the cold verdict carried clear to safety, and that this was the number he got to keep, the only number that had ever truly been his, and that it was a good number, the best number of his whole long life, and that a man could ask for no finer thing to die holding. Then he fired the lance straight into the core of the eternal reckoning. The lance reached the charging collapse, and the doomsday weapon meant to unmake 40,000 kilometers folded instead into the single hull that held it. The radius that should have swallowed a sphere wider than a world collapsed inward, contained, devouring only itself, and the largest ship the Aurelian sovereignty had ever built, and the small black dreadnought 12,000 kilometers from its bow, and the old man at the center of that dreadnought, and Vor Heshtalion, who had ruled the Count, and Sashka Vel, who had learned at the very end to read the thing the Count could not hold. All of it became, in one white and silent instant, a light that the surviving ships of both fleets would carry behind their eyes for the rest of their lives. When the light faded, the eternal reckoning was gone, and the cold verdict was gone, and the collapse was spent on nothing but itself, and 40,000 kilometers of the surrendered, and the helpless and the dead, lived on, untouched. Because one old man had folded the Empire's last cruelty back into the Empire's own hull, and the last tide had 90 ships where it had brought 91, and the one it had lost had not failed, had not retreated, had not lost, had not surrendered. It had finished the thing it came to finish, and the old man inside it had spent himself the way a man spends the last and best coin he has, on purpose, with his eyes open, for the people he would never see again, and the people he had buried 8 years before. The aftermath was quiet, as the largest things often are. The remaining ships of the Aurelian sovereignty, 38,000 of them now, drifted in the wreckage of an empire that had ruled the galaxy by the count, and they were leaderless, and they were broken, and for the first time in 11,000 years, they were the lesser number, and they knew it, all of them. In the deepest part of the place the empire had never thought to count. The last tide held its lines. It did not fire. The guns on the other side had gone silent, every one, the last of the proud ones consumed with their grand tally, and Aldous Crane's order held even with Aldous Crane gone, because his crews had learned it from him, and it was theirs now, would always be theirs now. The helpless live. Earth does not murder the helpless. That is the line. That is the whole line. The line that separated them from the thing they had come to answer, and they did not cross it, not even now. Not even with their admiral's light still fading behind their eyes. Priya Anand, aboard the unyielding now, the flag of the last tide passed to her in the worst hour of her life, looked at the 38,000 surviving enemy ships, and gave the only order Aldous Crane would have given, which was no order at all. Hold fire, let the silent ones live, let them carry it home. She stood where he had stood, on a bridge that was not the one she had served on, with his words still in her ears, and his absence a weight she would carry for the rest of her years, and she understood, in that moment, the last thing he had been teaching her without ever saying it aloud, which was that the hardest order a victor ever gives is the order to stop, and that an empire that does not know how to stop is not strong, it is only large, and that the difference between large and strong is the whole of what had happened that day. And then the thing happened that the title of this story has been promising from its first word, the reversal that closed the long account, and it happened on the common band, the open channel where, hours before, the Empire had broadcast its ultimatum to a planet it had ordered to kneel by dawn. Now, the day after that dawn, the channel filled again, but not with an order. It filled with voices, the surviving crews of the Aurelian sovereignty, the beings who had come to make Earth small, who had counted 340,000 hulls and called it the truth, opened their channels all at once and spoke, and what they said was not a demand, and was not a threat, and was not the count. It was a plea. 100,000 throats across 38,000 ships, the last of an empire that had never in its history asked anyone for anything, asking now, in 100 dialects, on the open band, in voices that broke and climbed and would not stop, asking the small blue planet and its 90 remaining ships, the only thing they had left to ask. Stop, please, we yield, we will never come again, please, Earth, stop. The empire that had ordered Earth to kneel by dawn was, the day after, begging Earth on its knees. The powerful had been made to feel small, completely, in a single day, by 91 ships and one old man, and they were learning, now, in the wreckage, what 900 conquered worlds had always known, and the count had never been able to measure, which is what it feels like to look up at someone larger than you and understand that mercy is the only thing in the universe a number cannot buy. They had been certain, the day before, that no one could stand against numbers. Now 100,000 of them wept into the open dark, and the numbers were ash around them, and the standing thing had a name they would teach their grandchildren to say with lowered voices. There is a particular sound 100,000 voices make when they are all afraid at once, and it is not loud, it is low. A kind of vast, soft moan that fills a channel the way water fills a hold, and Priya Anand listened to it, and she did not gloat, because he had taught her not to, and she did not answer it with words, because there were no words equal to it, and she only sat very still on the borrowed bridge, and let the empire hear its own voice for the first time in 11,000 years, which was its punishment, and its lesson, and the beginning, though it did not know it yet, of the only thing that might one day make it something other than what it had been. Earth did not answer the pleas with words. It answered them by holding its fire, which was the only answer that mattered, and the only one Aldous Crane would have given, and the only one that kept the line he had drawn. The 38,000 surviving ships of the Aurelian sovereignty turned, slowly, and limped home to an empire that would never again rule by the count, because the count had been seen, by every world it ruled, to fail. The signal of the battle had gone out on every open channel by the Grand Tally's own order, so that Earth might watch its defenders die, and instead 900 conquered worlds had watched the count die, had watched 91 ships unmake the number that had held them down for 11,000 years. Within a single year the tribute stopped flowing, because no world will pay tribute to a number it has watched fail. Within a generation, the sovereignty was 900 free worlds, and a long, cold memory. And in every one of those 900 languages, the memory had a name, and the name was always the same, and the name was the last tide. And the worlds that had been cleared and not even named now carved their own names beside it, and Meridian first among them. Sashka Vale did not survive. She had stayed at the heart of it, on the bridge of the eternal reckoning, and the light took her with her commander. And so it fell to the one sovereignty officer who had understood the lesson first to carry it home in her place. Telish Vire survived. The young sub-commander who had broken formation in the fourth shell, who had said the line is what we were, who had scattered his squadron and lived, came home to the wreckage of the empire and would not let it forget. He spent the rest of his long life telling the worlds of the fallen sovereignty what he had learned on the worst and clearest day of his existence. He told them about the box and the thing inside it. He told them the human admiral had been 71 years old and had a failing heart and had run his own ship alone into the doomsday weapon so that 90 of his ships could go home. All of them, every one, 240 crew carried clear by an old man who chose to stay behind. He told them the human's name, and he made sure every world knew it. Aldous Crane. He told them about the 410 clearances, and the names the Empire did not keep, and he made the Empire's children keep them now. All of them, one a day, the way the humans had, until keeping the names of the dead became the first law of the worlds that had once been the sovereignty. And when the children of those worlds asked him, as children always did, how it could be that 91 ships had unmade 340,000, Telish Vire would not give them the easy answer, the one about the weapon, because the weapon had only been a tool, and a tool was not a reason. He gave them the hard answer instead, the true one, the one he had spent his whole life learning to say without his voice breaking. He told them the Empire had counted hulls and the humans had counted something else, something the Empire had never had a name for, and that the something else had a price, and that the price was a thing the Empire had never once in 11,000 years been willing to pay, which was for the one who gives the order to be the first and not the last to spend himself for it. And then Telish Vire told them the one thing the Empire had never counted, and would never have had a column for, the lesson that closed the account of 11,000 years, and he made them say it back to him, the way they had once been made to say that the number always wins, until 100,000 throats had learned the new and truer words, and taught them to their grandchildren. They counted 340,000 hulls, and they never once counted the one old man who was worth all of them, and by the time they learned to count him, he was already gone, and so were they.